All men and women are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
That quote was written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton in the Declaration of Sentiments, Grievances, and Resolutions. That document was shared in Seneca Falls, New York on July 19th through the 20th, at the first ever meeting to discuss the rights of women. The meeting was hosted by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. 100 people came, including Frederick Douglass, a former slave who was an activist and believed all humans should have equal rights.
Douglass brought his family along with him to the meeting. Frederick Douglass Jr., his son, Mrs. Nathan Sprague, his daughter, and Nathan Sprague, his son-in-law. He, his family, and everyone else at the meeting signed a petition for the right for women to vote. Frederick Douglass said, "In respect to political rights, there can be no reason in the world for denying women the elective franchise. Along with the right to vote, there are many other things discussed at the meeting. These things include social barriers that limit women, family duties, lack of educational and economic rights, and lack of voice in politics." It was a revolutionary meeting that kicked off the beginning to the women's suffrage.
My name is Malachi Nix.
And my name is Bria Marie Willie, and this is the story of the women's suffrage. From 1848 to 1920, women protested for the right to vote. They eventually succeeded. However, there is still conflict between men and women today, like equal rights in the workplace and sexism in the media.
My partner and I wanted to study the women's suffrage because we feel it's so important to recognize the strength and courage of iconic women such as Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton that earned women the right to vote. We interviewed Dr. Anna Maria Flores on women in the media. She has a PhD in communication and an undergraduate degree in sociology and women and gender studies.
We asked her why she wanted to pursue a degree on women and gender studies, and this is what she said. "I felt compelled to see how media and gender roles have changed over the years. Just like Dr. Flores, my partner and I believe that studying gender roles and the impact of women is very vital. Women have had many obstacles, and the fight for the right to vote was just one of them." We will hear more about Dr. Flores later, but let's get back to the 1850s. After the Seneca Falls meeting was finished on July 20th, 1848, people went on to the protest. They weren't given any attention, though, because they were overpowered by the Civil War. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who had created a close partnership with each other after the Seneca Falls meeting, weren't going to be overshadowed, so they hatched a plan. After the war was over, the 15th Amendment was created. The 15th Amendment allowed African American men the right to vote. After the 15th Amendment was ratified, their plan was all ready to execute. Here's what they did. The two women refused to support the 15th Amendment even though they were against slavery, and partnered with racist Southerners who wanted women to have the right to vote. The only reason they wanted the right to vote, though, is because they figured that if white women voted, it would balance out the votes cast by African American men. Stanton and Anthony were aware of this and strongly disagreed, but they were doing whatever they could to get their message across. Together they created the NWSA. That stands for National Women's Suffrage Association. It was created in 1869, but they weren't the only association. Lucy Stone started the AWSA, or American Women's Suffrage Association. She was an abolitionist and a women's rights advocate. Stone rejected the NWSA because they were partnered with racist Southerners. The two associations continued throughout the next decade. Then, in 1878, the Amendment for Women to Vote was introduced to Congress. Both the NWSA and the AWSA struggled through the next couple years because they had no male politician support, but they began to gain hope in the 1890s because America gained many volunteers from middle-class women. This gave the NWSA and the AWSA power, and they merged into the NAWSA. That stands for National American Women's Suffrage Association, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton was the first president. The NAWSA decided to pitch a new argument to Congress. Their new argument was that women deserved the vote because they were different from men, rather than men and women were created equal. They used this tactic because they were able to make their domestic abilities into a political virtue. In other words, they were saying that because they were able to manage their household, they were able to manage their own vote. They also used this tactic because it convinced white voters to agree since it would ensure immediate and durable white supremacy, much like the 15th Amendment vote.
During the next 2 decades, the NAWSA continued trying to get each state vote in their favor. The efforts paid off, and some states voted in favor of women voting. Colorado voted yes in 1893, Utah in 1896, and Idaho in 1896.
Now we move to 1910. More states said yes. These states were Washington, California, Arizona, Kansas, and Oregon. Fast forward 2 years later, on November 5, 1912, Woodrow Wilson was elected President of the United States. This seemed like a loss for the suffragists, since President Wilson did not want women to have the right to vote. But surprisingly, he changed his opinion throughout his term.
In 1913, Alice Paul, a new and young suffragist, started the NWP, or the National Woman's Party. She gained many followers and supporters because of her age.
Then on March 3rd, the day before Woodrow Wilson was inaugurated, 5,000 protesters marched down Pennsylvania Avenue.
It was organized by the NAWSA and Alice Paul.
The march started at Peace Monument, passed by the White House, and finished at the Memorial Continental Hall. After the march, several suffragists scheduled multiple meetings with the president to discuss their voting rights. 5,000 women protested again on May 9, 1914.
Then in 1915, Carrie Chapman Catt became the NAWSA's new president. She brought a new approach to the table that got states in the East to vote yes.
In 1917, President Woodrow Wilson gave this speech to Congress. Women have proved themselves equal in every field of practical work they have entered, whether for themselves or their country. After this speech, the president continued to advocate for the suffrage movement. Also in 1917, the East began to vote yes thanks to Carrie Catt. Arkansas and New York gave women partial and full voting rights.
On January 10, 1918, the House of Representatives passed voting rights. Congress did not agree. On May 21, 1919, the Susan B. Anthony Amendment passed 304 to 89 in the House of Representatives and 56 to 25 in the Senate.
Now suffragists needed 3/4 of the states to vote yes. They petitioned relentlessly for the next year, and finally on August 18, 1920, Tennessee became the 36th state to vote yes for the 19th Amendment.
Although this was a huge success for women all over the country, women continued to face struggles because of their gender. For example, in the words of Dr. Flores, the portrayal of women is the most detrimental to young and aging girls, as they are often represented as sex objects or flawed consumers who can be fixed with the consumption of some product that will magically transform them into someone to be desired.
Women are presented next to advertising for makeup and clothing that are supposed to buy happiness, and articles on how to be more likable, when in reality, they are selling an unattainable life. The ratification of the 19th Amendment was a compromise, but there is still so much conflict that women experience today because of their gender. But we as a nation cannot give up. Keep learning and keep fighting. This is the story of the women's suffrage.